Boom. Okay. Hey, everybody. Exciting times in the world and in life and in your family.
What's exciting?
Oh, now you called me out. I have to think of exciting things. Well, so, okay, before we dive into the main topic tonight, which is
teaser,
how to raise an adult.
Ooh.
And particularly a thing called a brainstorm. And we'll work through that.
AKA teenager.
Yeah, it's the brainstorm that's happening in adolescence. And if you have adolescence, you'll appreciate this. If you have had adolescence, you'll appreciate this. If you're going to have adolescence, you'll appreciate this. You need this, right? It's super important and really fascinating, actually, really, really fascinating and insightful. But before we dive into that, I want to share some things that I've been really leaning into, because I feel like you guys are here. You show up to, like, it's the holistic approach to family, right? That's why we're here. That's why we're doing the formula. That's why this is how Rachel and I approach life, is like, it's the whole picture. And
it's not separated
in
parts.
Inside the formula, yeah, it's all on, if you put it on one hand, it's the fingers on your hand. Inside the formula, it's you, it's your marriage, your parenting, your family culture and dynamics, and your family finances, right? And it all goes together, and they're all kind of interrelated and connected. And I want to share something about finances. The world,
just as a little teaser intro thing, a little tangent.
It's a little tangent. But it's a significant tangent. So all of you watching the recording, here with us, like, all of you, please pay attention to this. There have been some massive changes in recent times that are disrupting everything we have known, right? And specifically, one of those things is cryptocurrency. And now there's NFTs that are coming. I still have not been able to really wrap my mind around cryptocurrency and that kind of stuff, right? I've talked to people who are super smart, they know about it, watch videos, like, I'm still not getting it. But the reality is that it is here. It's not going away. New cryptocurrencies are popping up. They're becoming massively popular, and in a lot of ways are going to replace a lot of traditional currency, like dollars, right? Now, there's a lot of people still thinking, like, well, there's going to be currencies, there's going to be dollars, but countries now, entire nations are moving towards crypto being their official currency, right? That's a bold move, and it's significant. It's not something to be ignored. This isn't a fad. This isn't a trend. This isn't like, oh, that's something interesting people are doing. It's significant, and you don't want to, like, sleep through it. Was it Rip Van Winkle that slept through the revolution, and the whole establishment that, like, just wakes up like, oh, what happened? Right? You don't want to just cruise along and ignore this. So that's all I'm saying. And, like, Bitcoin is the most popular one that people have heard about, and right now it's up at like $57,000 per coin. It's crazy huge. But there's all kinds of other coins coming out, and they're creating these systems that work with coins, and then that work in between the coin and currency.
You're just
and
geeking
global
out too much here. Like, this is just more than I can.
But the point, and if you're feeling like that, you're like, I don't even know what it is. Like, what in the world? Like, all I'm saying is, none of us can afford to ignore this. You at least have to be, at a minimum, you have to be aware of what's going on. Today, I wish I could pull up the chart again. I was going through with some youth that I'm working with, including our son, and we looked at it, and I think within just a 24-hour period, there'd been, I can't even remember, like maybe $42 billion of transactions had already happened just in Bitcoin. Whoa. $42 billion of transactions in 24-hour period. Like, this is no joke. And that's just one of this hundreds and hundreds of coins. And so a lot of people are moving that way. Many people are becoming insanely wealthy because of cryptocurrency, where it gets introduced to the market at half a cent and then runs up to dollars or hundreds of dollars or thousands of dollars. And anyone who had the good fortune to get in, or the wisdom to get in early, you can take, you know, $5 or $10 or $20,000 investment, it turns into millions of dollars. So people are becoming millionaires every day just because the market's moving, and it's moving fast. Right? Are you with me on this? So people like your neighbor, you might be like, hey, yeah, my neighbor, he's a little nerdy, kind of geeky dude. And then all of a sudden, like a couple of weeks from now, he's going to roll up in a Lamborghini. You're like, what? He's like, yeah, we're moving into our mansion. You're like, what happened? He's like, oh, I got some crypto. Right? Boom. It just moves. And there's going to be, a lot of people are thinking that it's going to be a really kind of a safe place to hedge against inflation that is coming. So again, I bring this up because we have to. Like, you might be like, come on, get to the family stuff here. Like, this is part of it. Family finances matter so much. And there's so much leverage on the market. And I know I'm using terms you might be like, what is he talking about?
Kind of. I'm a little bit like that.
The entire global money market is so leveraged right now to the tune of trillions and trillions of dollars. There's so much debt globally, and there's so much leveraged that any mistake, any little mishap with all that leverage, if it slips a little bit, we are all going to feel it. Okay. Now, that's not like the sky is falling. I'm not trying to be, try to drum up fear or worry or concern. I want everyone to know that, like, it doesn't mean like it's disaster and like everyone's going to be hurting, but we will all feel it and we'll sense it, and there's going to be changes. So I kind of feel like a moral obligation to share this with everybody, that there's going to be big turns in like stock markets and the economy and businesses, and in the dollar and inflation. So prices of commodities, food, necessities are likely to go up, and the value of our dollar goes down, and there's all this stuff. So anyways, like, it's fascinating times to be alive. Please don't just close your eyes and stick your head in the sand and be like, I'm just gonna pretend that it's not happening, I'm gonna live my happy life. Like, don't do that. At
this
least
is what Greg has been geeking out on.
Oh, totally geeking out on it, because I have a friend who's deep into it, and he started telling me about it, explaining to me. I'm
We've
like,
got a couple friends.
yeah,
Coaching clients.
Now I start talking to them, like, oh, they're in it, man. They're way in it, and they understand it more. And they got in before, which I'm like, why didn't you tell me? Because that was amazing. And like, some of my friends and coaching clients have made millions of dollars already. And anyways, it's awesome. It's a cool time to be alive. But all I'm saying is learn about it, please, and set up at least some understanding, if not some participation.
Okay.
Oh man, so good. We could spend the whole time on this.
Yes, but this was just a
tangent. No. But let me say though, if this group is interested in this, like, I think we would be happy to do a whole thing on this, on family finances.
That would be more at least this part of it.
Okay. I'll go to town, baby.
I don't understand it as well.
And like investing and where to move your money, and put like just awareness, right? I don't have to give any like financial advising, but like, hey, these are things we need to be aware of. And if you're in a spot to do that, you need to participate, because there's a lot of wisdom in this kind of stuff. And it's part of the family, right? Family finances. Because you remove the money, and now there's no money to support the mission, right? You gotta have money. You gotta have money to support the mission. So awesome stuff. Really awesome stuff. Okay. Whew. Okay. Any questions about that? No, let's just go. Let's just hit it. So today we are going to talk about what happens. Well, let me back up like this. Let me ask the question. As you're raising kids, and those of you who are, well, you're in this whole process, right? And it's kind of a no-brainer question. It's like, duh. But have you noticed how your children's brains change over time? Right? And you're like, yeah. Like, yeah, you got to be blind, deaf, and dumb not to see that, right? But the way our kids' brains work and function at each time period depend on, well, determine their behaviors and their cognitive abilities and their comprehension and their reactions. And really, we have to understand the stages of brain development. You guys with me on this? Like this is huge. And it's actually really fun and exciting. We have to understand the stages of brain development so that we can work with our kids. Man, I've lost count how many times I have seen parents trying to get young kids to understand something abstractly that they cannot understand. A small child cannot understand abstract ideas, not because they're dumb, because their brain is in a stage of development that cannot yet comprehend abstract ideas. So there's neural connections that have not yet been made. No fault of, it's not the parents' fault, it's not the kid's fault. It's like, that's where they're at in their stage of development. Like the brain goes through this process. And that hasn't happened. And the parents are like, come on, kid. Like, what's wrong with you? Like, get this. And I'm like, hey, their brain is at a stage of development. Like, that doesn't work. You can't expect that. But then there's other ways, you flip side of like, parents are over here like, oh, I wish my kids would do that. I'm like, well, train them. Like, no, they can't. I'm like, they can totally do that. Right. So there's things kids get way more capable than you think, but sometimes in the wrong thing. Does that make sense? So we're trying to get them to understand something they can't while totally neglecting something they can. They absolutely can, right? Yes, exactly. Comment here in the chat box. I have to remind myself of this a lot. I forget they aren't capable to comprehend everything I'm trying to explain sometimes. Yes, yes, yes. So one of the most valuable things we can do as parents is consistently remind ourselves, like, we're working with these wonderful, like, miracles of creation and life, and they're all at a different stage of development. And so whatever you're doing with this child, you have to remember where they're at. The hardest, and I always feel bad for the first child, because the oldest child is the experiment where we're learning. And I don't know, man, I do not know why it is. But for some reason, well, I mean, I get it because we did it too, but for some reason as parents, we just always, oh man, you guys, I think some of us are in one meeting room and some are in another. Let me check this. Yeah, that's okay. I think we're good. We'll see. Okay. There might have been some confusion about the Zoom room link, but as we're going along, we have to remember, like, okay, whatever I'm doing, I have to make sure it works with the child in their stage of brain development. And we look at the oldest child, the poor oldest child is the experiment. And we always expect the oldest child, no matter where they're at, we expect them to be capable of more than they are, because we look at them and they could be 6 or 16.
I have the perfect stories for this.
Okay.
You know my stories, okay? Our oldest daughter, she was adopted. We adopted her when she was 5 days old, okay? I remember, it's so funny. She was our first child, okay? When she was like a year old, well, you get the baby and you're like, oh, they're so cute and teeny. And then they grow and they grow and they grow and they start talking, they start babbling and doing their different things. And you're like, they're growing, they're so big. I remember when she was a year, someone was like, oh, how old is your baby? And in my head, I thought, she's not a baby, she's 1, right? I remember thinking that. It's so laughable to me now with 7 kids, because I'm like, of course at 1, she's still a baby. Then to make that worse, our second child was born 18 months later, right? And this might have been by the time we had 3 kids, because then his brother was born 15 months after that. So they were all close. So by the time she was 3, I had 3 kids under the age of 3. And I remember I would sit in her room and I'd be like, you're not leaving until you get yourself dressed. You're old enough now to dress yourself, right? And I would be like so serious about it. And I would try to make her, she could dress herself, but sometimes she wanted to dress herself and sometimes she didn't want to dress herself, right? That's a 3-year-old. Now my 5-year-old, I mean, I still help her get dressed sometimes, right?
Because she just doesn't want to put her pants on.
Right. But I just remember thinking that. And so with this idea of like our poor oldest children, like I remember thinking, oh, you're so old, you're 3. You should dress yourself from now on. I should never have to help you again because you're 3. And now with my 7th, like, oh, you're so cute. Let me help you. I'll help you get dressed, right? Even though you're 5, like I'll still help because you're just so cute and little. Anyways, that was my.
And we do that as we go along, and we forget. The way you describe it is so beautiful, is because you watch every stage and you go from like, they couldn't do anything but nurse and poop, and now they say cute words and they walk around,
and they're almost walking.
They hold their sippy, like you're so capable. And then as they go along, like they become 12 or 13, and you're like, come on already, you're 13, act like an adult. And you forget, like, if you were over here and talking with someone like, oh man, they're just 13. They're so little. Like 13's like small. And you realize that after your oldest is now like 21, and you look back and you're like, oh, our little 13-year-old, like, yeah, we're not gonna expect too much, right? But you learn along the way. So the point is, we have to be cognizant. In order to be really great parents, we have to be cognizant of our children's development and where they are at each level of development and what is happening inside the brain. Because if we know what's happening, you're like, well, duh, no wonder they're acting like they're 4. It's because they are 4.
Well, and I think it's important to also remember, this was something I had to realize, not only do we have to be aware of where they are in their brain development and their age, but that can vary across spectrums of their development, meaning their verbal development or their physical development or their reading development or their math development or their maturity level developments can all be different. They could be 3 or 13 and be very mature for a 3-year-old in vocabulary and very immature in emotional control, right? Same with 13. And so sometimes we look, and then especially if we then compare them to our other children or other people's children, and we're like, you're 13. You should be able to do all of these things at a 13-year-old level. And then really the reality is that's just not true for every person, for every child. And probably for the majority of the time, they're all going to be at a different level. In fact, I have this spreadsheet that I fill out sometimes of like, okay, where is my child in their maturity levels in all of these different areas? And there's like 15 different areas of like, mental, emotional, spiritual, reading, math. They're going to be at different levels. And each child is going to be different.
Oh man. And if we could keep that in mind as we are interacting with the child, almost like take a quick snapshot at the chart, and you got 15 areas and they're each marked at different levels. And so, and again, it's really dangerous for us to say, okay, she's 11 now, she should be doing 11-year-old across the board. That's not accurate and not fair. And you're, hey, when your brother was 11, he this, or she did. That's not fair either. None of that's fair. Because like Rachel was explaining, they're all different. And so you might be working with your 11-year-old, but like, okay, still, and again, no fault of the child, no fault of the parent. Well, there can be fault. There can be fault on the child and the parent, like if we don't help them grow, like if we're like negligent in like development, you're like, okay, yeah, you got to do something about that. But if you're trying and they're just normal development, You might have a child that in this cognitive thing or social skills, it hasn't come yet. You've worked on it. You are working on it. It's just not there. And it's not, doesn't match up with the ages down here. But like, you don't like, oh, my kid's never going to have friends. Oh, it's terrible. Right. They're just at different levels. And so your interaction with them has to be consistent with the chart.
Well,
if that makes sense.
The perfect example comparison, I think, from our own kids, we have to use our own kids as examples. Our oldest son is 15 months older than his brother. He walked, talked, and like potty trained himself before he was like 18 months old. That his brother he didn't even crawl until he was 18 months old, did not walk or talk until he was 3.
He's like, dude, I'm just.
He was on his own timetable. Now, interestingly enough, though, by the time he hit like 13, he was taller than his older brother.
Big, all muscle. Whoa.
And at the time, more mature. Now these boys are 17 and 16, and the 17-year-old is taller now. But it was very fascinating to see that. I mean, boys so close together, raised the same, and yet their growth and development was on its own schedule. And that we didn't have control of.
The physical manifestation that everybody saw, because it was so blatant, is a representation of all the other developments that are unseen, but still happening. And so the one son like really developed, and then he stayed short for a long time. His brother passed him a lot. Everyone thought he was older and just big, and Parker was like, when am I gonna be bigger? I'm the shrimp. And then all of a sudden, in like a 6-month period, he was like, see ya, sucker. And he just boom, he hit it right. And they're all changing like that all the time. And we as parents sometimes sit back and we're like, oh, my kid. And then a few months later, it's totally changed. And so there's development happening all the time. And just having that awareness as parents is totally transformational for all of us to say, wait a minute, I'm working with this wonderful human being that has at least 15 different aspects of development, and they're all on different levels. And that's why we call it brainstorm. There's this storm of activity happening in their brains, and we need to be aware of it. Now, obviously, there can be anomalies and there can be problems.
Well, before you get into that, I just want to say something, because tying it in with like the title of what we called this is how to raise an adult. Very often, and I know this was for us at the beginning, especially, we think to raise an adult, we have to treat our children or have these adult-like expectations for them while they're young. We have these almost strict rules and boundaries and disciplines and requiring obedience type, like, I'm going to help you be this dutiful, mature, like fill in the blank here, responsible person starting when you're 3. That was my mindset at the time with my 3-year-old oldest daughter. I'm going to make sure my kids are responsible and they're hardworking and they're, they can take care of themselves. So I'm going to make my 3-year-old dress themselves. Right?
Because I don't want her to grow up and be one of those adults that's not an adult.
Right, exactly.
So I'm gonna make her as a 3-year-old act like an adult. We're gonna take her to a restaurant and make sure she sits perfectly still. Like,
and the irony is, if I had continued in that frame of mind, I guarantee you it would have been disastrous.
There
because
would be
we
issues.
Working with other families and other, seeing it now and being observant of it and aware of it, we see that usually, ironically, has the opposite outcome. That when you don't respect the age appropriate levels development of your children, it backfires.
And not even age. We got to be careful as we keep using age,
right?
Because
it's not always age.
Age is almost irrelevant. Because you might be like, hey man, you're 8, you act like this, and this now.
It can
You're
provide a frame of reference.
Tiny framework, but be flexible, because on some levels they might still be at 5, and others they might be at 11, so to speak, if you're using age, right? You're like, man, your math abilities are way down here, but your maturity and like sense of responsibility and taking care of your space, your situational awareness, like really high. This is amazing. And every kid's different.
Yeah.
But expecting a child to act way above where they are is often detrimental and has far-reaching consequences. And then, like I said early in the beginning, sometimes we go to the opposite side of the spectrum and we don't expect enough. And we think, oh, they're just so little, they can't do that. And you're like, oh, that they could totally do. And they could own it, and it would be really good for them. So you get what I'm saying? We have to be careful about this, because sometimes we totally miss it over here and then totally miss it over here.
And that is what makes parenting so challenging.
It's easy.
Yeah. It's a challenge because you're constantly evaluating where your kids are at, taking into consideration all of these things that we just talked about. And you're like, oh yeah, that's easy. Just scan. I got it. It's not easy. It takes a lot of intuitiveness.
There should be an app.
Scan the child. Where are you?
Hey, like,
mentally, emotionally, physically.
You just did something here. Hold your hand out and I'll scan. Like, okay.
Wouldn't that be great? Wow.
But mentally we can do this, is like take a quick assessment of like, okay, where are they at before you respond? And this is both positive and negative. Before you have a mentor meeting with them, before you try to connect, and especially before you try to discipline.
Oh, definitely. Definitely.
That one's huge. You drop a hammer or you pull out a big consequence when a tiny consequence would have done the trick and actually been far more effective. So where are your kids? And so as we're going through this right now, I'm sure you're already doing this. Like, I actually want to invite you to get a notebook, get a journal, get just a piece of paper, open a document on your computer, open some notes on your phone, and just capture some thoughts. Where's your kid right now? And maybe go in your calendar and schedule out every quarter or every 6 months a time slot that you set aside, maybe a Sunday afternoon. You sit down and update this. Where's my kid? So that you have a current operating perspective of where each child is. Now, if you have a lot like we do, 7 kids, like, whoa, okay, that's a lot. There's a lot of moving brain parts there, man. It's all over the place. And you have to shift. Like, you don't have the luxury of like, I'm dealing with all the same people at all the same level. Like, and for Rachel, you moms, man, there's one kid walks in like, la, 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 and walks out. The next kid comes in with totally different levels, la, 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 and you have to have a different response. Because it's a different brain.
I've been joking lately that I'm the genie from Aladdin, because I'm like, what do you need? What do you need? What do you need? They come into my house. What do you need? And so I start doing that now, and they think it's fine. What do you need?
And it's each response is different for each kid, because the kid's different, but they're all at different levels and cognitive levels. And even if you had like twins or triplets, like, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're at the same level. Is this landing for you peoples? All of you, if you're watching the recording, like, take notes on this stuff, let it hit. Yeah. Amy said, and the older ones, like, if again, back on the older ones, we're really looking at
treating your 3-year-old like they should dress themselves.
They get upset when they see the different way we adjust our approach with the younger ones.
Yeah.
So like,
and that's when
you made me, and you're like,
yeah,
I'm sorry. I'm really deeply sorry.
Like, that was dumb. I don't know why I did that.
We were experimenting on you.
That. Yeah, and that's a good time to have those conversations, because again, part of this approach, the reason that it's effective is because it's dynamic and you talk about it. And you talk about it with your kids and you say, well, yeah, your brother, he's not as good with this as you are. And not in a comparing type way, but saying we all have our different talents and strengths and our different developmental timelines. And we've talked about the things I told you with our kids, like that one of them was potty trained at 1.5 years and others it took longer, and some of them walked sooner and some of them walked later, and that they're all different. And that's a part of how
Great.
life is, and that's great.
And you don't want to
so,
be going
yeah,
along comparing
I'll tell my
and
kids all the
competing.
time, well, you didn't do that with them, or you did this with them. I'm like, well, yeah, you're different. You're different people, and I'm going to treat you differently, and I'm going to discipline you differently. I'm going to interact with you differently because you are different. So yeah, that's a good point there.
And you keep learning from each child and from the mistakes and the insights. And yeah, then you, whenever, I love using this one, especially our 11-year-old right now, he's watching everything and everyone because he's right smack in the middle. He's got little sisters below him, teens above him. He's constantly like, well, that. And my favorite response is, oh, did you want to be a 14-year-old girl? Because you're not. So don't be trying to compare, right? And it's just so fun.
Or a 7-year-old girl.
You want to be a 7-year-old girl? Is that what you're telling me? You want to be a 7-year-old girl, right? No. I'm like, all right, stop trying. Like, let's go, buddy. It's fun. So I'll jest with them that way and say, look, we're all on our own journey. So thoughts or questions, insights from you guys? Hopefully some light bulbs are clicking here with each of your children. You're going, oh, okay. This is where this child's at. And then I hope that starts making these connections for you of like, this is the approach I need to try with this kid who's in this state with this thing. And again, like we mentioned before, you might be quite firm with them in one aspect and very patient in another because they're just not there yet. Right. Yeah. And that can be tough. Man, that can be tough.
But I definitely think it's the hard-nosed, same approach for everybody, regardless of the
kid or the age.
Well, I'm trying to say the transgression, yeah. I guess.
Yeah.
This is what you get. It's that kind of, it's almost like an inhumane, like a lacking of compassion and empathy and connection and true awareness and understanding of circumstances and situations. That is what, because what I'm trying to say here is that ultimately the best way to raise adults that are competent and capable, which is two of the words we love to use, is by having a powerful and meaningful relationship with them. You want to have a relationship with your child that's a mentoring, friendship, coaching, meaningful relationship, something that like you actually enjoy. You actually enjoy being with your kids. You actually enjoy talking to your kids. You actually enjoy helping them become their best self. You actually look forward to them growing up and becoming adults so that you're then friends, right? I mean, that's our goal. That's our aim. We're raising our best friends. And we tell them that sometimes. You guys are our best friends. And as they get older and older, like it just gets funner and funner.
And it's the best way to make sure you have really cool friends.
Yeah, exactly. That too. But the best way to do that is to remember that you're working with another human being that's not just your child. Yes, they're your child and you have this duty over them. But if you take these hard-nosed approaches, that kills the relationship, which then kills the development, essentially. It's very interconnected. The better your relationship is, the better their development is. And so when that relationship is strained or damaged, their growth and development into becoming competent, capable adults is strained and damaged.
Yeah. And I would like to be so bold as to say that if I, as a father, say, well, you know, this is the way I was raised and this is the way I'm doing it, and it's a one size fits all, and this is how things will be in my house, that is unbelievably ignorant and inhumane, and it doesn't work. And if it is genuine, like, and I'm not in an insulting way, but like in a definition way, by definition, it is extremely ignorant to look at a child as just like one cell organism that you're just like, this is how things are.
This is a child and this is how you treat a child.
No way. It just won't work. And that's why there's all these adults who have trauma still from their parents not knowing how to interact with them or help. Right. And again, it's born out of not knowing. So I have a lot of compassion for parents because they don't know any better. But that's why we're doing this, people. This is so important. And I was just sitting here thinking while you're talking, like, I want to share this with the whole world. Like, anyone who's a parent has to get this. They have to get this. Okay, great questions coming in.
Comments.
What categories are you evaluating? And is there a resource you use to evaluate where they are in the development? Ooh,
yes.
Good question.
So I have this spreadsheet I mentioned already. And if you email me and remind me, I will actually put it into the dashboard so that when you go in there, well, I mean, I'll email it right to you, but I'll also put it in the dashboard so other people can get it. And it has, I don't know, 10 or 15 different categories. I use it for homeschooling as well. So it includes academic categories because our approach to homeschooling, like we talk about in the education coaching we do, is that we're not just working on academic learning. We're looking at the whole development of the child. So their emotional, mental.
Like multiple intelligences?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That type
That's
of
a
thing.
great book for that.
So that's something I use, but it's helpful for this. As far as the resources, that's when it starts to get, what's the word for that?
You could go get
You could go
get a PhD in childhood development and be like, what?
Well, the resources basically come down to, okay, I'm identifying this child and they are, say they're underdeveloped emotionally, or they're underdeveloped.
Let's come up with some categories. Let's share to give a broad thing. You're going to do.
One of them is like, are they clumsy? Like, how are they managing their body? I mean, some kids are just clumsy for longer, right?
Dropping stuff, spilling stuff.
They're not
all over the place.
graceful, right? That's one of the things.
And they almost go through like a stage as a toddler and then again as a tween or teen.
Yeah.
And you're like,
right.
What happened? Like you're dropping everything again. And it's because things are changing in their brains,
Yes.
literally.
So that's one of the things it talks
Emotional
about.
intelligence is one.
Yeah. How well do they handle
is one.
disappointment? How well do they handle things not working out like they plan? How well do they manage their own time or their own space even?
Yep.
Like, are they able to pick up after themselves or, get
Situational
themselves
awareness,
something to eat?
social
that type of
awareness,
stuff.
individual self-awareness. How well do they understand things? Like you'll be watching and you'll explain something and you can see like this one gets it, this one gets it, that one doesn't get it. You might have explained it a different way. And styles of learning. One might be very visual, one might be very auditory, one might be very tactile. So you have to identify all those things. Now, okay, huge warning right here. Please listen to this. Do not take something you observe and pinhole it on the kid and label them and say, this is the way you are and the way this thing. Because you do your kid a massive disservice if you're like, oh, you're this kind of kid.
Yeah.
And they take on that identity for the rest of their life. And they're like, no, they were just going through a stage, man.
Right.
In fact, do that.
I mean, that is one thing we do across the board, and that's we don't label our kids
at all.
So even though we have a couple of kids that have ADD, we rarely use that label.
Okay, but
or
if
they went through a clumsy phase, like we never said, hey, you're clumsy.
You're the clumsy one. Or introduce you, hey, this is so and so.
Even if it's a positive thing sometimes. Like we have a son who's basically an artist, but we don't say, oh, you're the artistic one.
Here's our son, he's the artist.
Right.
No, man. Like
because what we're trying to teach. So as far as resources, this would be the first resource I would recommend, and that's the book Mindset by Carol Dweck, which talks about the growth mindset versus the fixed mindset. That right there, I mean, should be required reading for every parent, because the underlying issue with all of this is the fixed mindset versus the growth mindset. And if you're not familiar with that, we can't
read that book
right now. Read the book. And we talked about it in a different training somewhere. But
so I have to. You brought up ADD, and I have to address this. This has to be addressed and understood. society is telling us like there's a disorder, ADD or ADHD. It's like this disorder, it's this problem, it's not working. And they're trying to medicate it. And they're trying to like put them in this little group of troubled youth, right? And when we went and talked to a brain specialist, had a brain scan done, and like did all this research, I geeked out on the brain. I love studying the brain. She sat down with us. She's like, actually, about half of society, okay, 50% of the people in the world have what she called the hunter's brain, and the other half have like, she didn't identify
It's
the
like
other
a
brain.
Gathering brain.
It's like you just stay in the village and like gather, right? But the hunter's brain is super active. It's just, there's nothing wrong with it. It's not one's better than the other. They're different types of brains and different learning, different styles. So maybe half of your children, I think half of ours do, about half of your kids are going to have the hunter's brain. The hunter's brain is active. It's stimulated. It's taking in all these responses. Like it grew up this way ancestrally. And it's like, it needs stimulation. It needs action. It needs movement.
It needs
like,
music.
It needs music. They're like listening to beat pop music with saying like, that doesn't work. Well, it doesn't work for you. Some people thrive in a library while others thrive at a coffee shop where there's noise and music, conversation, and they do better learning there than they would in the library. But we library people are like, turn it off, be quiet, sit still. And they're like, I can't think in that environment. Like, there must be something wrong with you. Or they fidget or touch things or move. I remember I had a student one time, no joke, the whole class, he just sat there and kicked his leg, just the one leg wiggling. I'm like, what's up with your leg? Oh, nothing. He put that down, the other leg start kicking. Like it couldn't sit still. There's rocking back and forth. They're moving. They just have to be going. There's nothing wrong with them. It's not a disorder. It's not a disease. It's not a problem. It's a different kind of brain. So please be aware of the type of brain your children have. Don't compare them and don't force them to do what the other does. If it works for one, and don't force it on the other when it doesn't work. And where we go crazy wrong with this one is trying to force a hunter brain child to be like the other kid, to sit still and be quiet and don't move and don't touch anything and stop doing that. Hey, get back over here. Just sit still and do your studies. They don't learn like that. They don't function like that. So we're trying to force a brain that doesn't operate with it to try to operate that way. It's a gigantic disservice. And the same is also true the other side. Like if you have a child that is quiet and ordered and neat and organized and likes a little space to do their thing, and you're like, hey, come out here where it's noisy, throw some music on, dance, hit some stuff, eat some food, throw things out. And they're like, I'm so overstimulated. Like this doesn't work for you. I'm like, it works for your brother. Sit down and do your stuff. Like, you guys with me? I'm trying to really emphasize this right now because we're doing our kids a massive disservice if we're not aware of what's going on in our kids' heads. Isn't this stuff awesome? Man, I love this. And if I wish we had a video screen tapped into all parents right now to share this idea. You've got to get it. You've got to get this. And if you don't, it won't work. And parenting won't turn out so good for you. It won't work so well for you. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, Daniel Amen's. Yep, we went to the Amen clinic. Yep.
Clinic in Atlanta.
So he's got great stuff. The Brain Warriors Way is excellent. Change Your Brain, Change Your Life. His YouTube channel, like he's got great stuff. Let's see, really make it intertwine the homeschooling your kids together when different things work for them. Absolutely. It is challenging. Yeah. Okay. It really makes it challenging. You're absolutely right. So, but right, you have to, you have no other option. You can't like cut it out and take a cookie cutter and be like, this is what we're gonna do for homeschool, because it won't work. If you have your kids learn one way and you have the other way, like.
Because that's an experiment society has been doing for the last 100 years, cookie cutter education.
A failed experiment, we might confidently say.
Well, okay, I kind of like the approach some people take, and they're like, it's not failed, it's producing the outcomes it was meant to produce, which is more of this, like, these are the outcomes we want. We want you to be able to do these things, to be able to follow the instructions and take the tests. And like, that's the outcomes they're trying to produce. And that's what you're getting. We're trying to go to another level. We're trying to see our kids as individuals with very unique challenges, brains, emotions, and say, how can we develop the full person? How can we help them to reach their complete potential, or at least as much of it as possible in their lifetime? You're not trying to make that happen before they're 18. That's not your goal, but you're trying to set them on that path, because if you set them on that path, they're going to keep following that path. I talked to my daughter today. She's 19. She's living in Texas. She has her own apartment. She's working. She interviewed for a new job that she was considering. So we talked about that. But she was like, she's dating this guy who is he's a little more in the path, in rut of, he doesn't question a lot of things as much and doesn't ask a ton of questions. He's like, isn't that kind of frightening sometimes? Don't you feel like your parents did you a disservice by teaching you to ask all these questions? She's like, no, are you kidding me? Like, what are you talking about? She's like, I remember, Mom, like, you told us it was okay to say no to you. It was okay to ask questions. Like, why do you want me to pick up my stuff on the floor? Why do you want me to load the dishwasher? Why do you want me to brush my hair? Why do you want, and I have this aunt, she doesn't have any children, and she finds that kind of infuriating. And in fact, some older generations, they find that infuriating. Like, why do you teach your kids to do that? Just have them be obedient. Just have them do what you say. If you say brush your hair, brush their hair. And I'm like, that's not what I'm trying to do. Like, that's not in line with the outcomes I'm trying to get. I'm trying to raise thinking, question asking, competent, capable adults. And so in order to reach that goal, I allow them to ask me questions. I allow them to say, well, no, I don't want to do that. And I allow us to have a conversation about things so that they get the understanding about why they do those things. When they can understand conceptually at their own level why they should brush their hair, guess what? They're more likely to do that. And they're more likely to pick up after themselves. And they're more likely to do their studies because they see why they should do their studies. When things are connected to their life and to what they understand and have relevance and meaning, like, oh, if I do this, this actually benefits my life, then they choose to do those things on their own. And you no longer have to tell them to do things, and you don't have to try to get them to be obedient, because they end up doing those things because they want to do those things. And ultimately, that's what you want in an adult that you've raised, right? You want them to do things that they see provide benefit and value to their life, and to choose to do them because they can see the outcome that that's going to produce. Okay. Yeah.
You're amazing. You're amazing and beautiful.
Thank you.
Oh. So let's lean into tweens and teens, and when you hit adolescence, and we call this Brainstorm. There's actually a book called Brainstorm. I think it's don't hold me to the name. I think it's Daniel Siegel. And I think he's the one that wrote the No Drama Discipline parenting book. And he gives a lot of references in there too. So that actually would be a good reference for brain stages, a good resource, and how to like discipline and interact with kids at the different levels, because he studied all this in brain development. And he wrote this one about Brainstorm, really talking about how the brain changes massively. It goes through stages, right? It's always changing and developing, especially all the way up till 25. You've heard that, like, the brain's still developing, still making connection. But... Right. And then there's plasticity. They've now found out there's plasticity. Like, you can change the brain till you die. Like, you can keep learning and growing. And in fact, you have to. They're finding out, like, if you don't.
They're finding out that's directly connected to Alzheimer's. If you
dementia.
Stop learning, your brain starts dying, basically.
And go. So you want to keep doing that. But the brain is really still growing and developing. It's not fully developed until about 25. And it'll go through stages where there's a brainstorm, like boom, massive change happening, boom, massive change happening. And it hits these stages. One of them happens around 8. And Glenn Doman talked a lot about that, like the change that happens around 8, where you can really start comprehending things you couldn't comprehend before. I see it happening around 12, 14. Like you can kind of see them marked out. And again, they're a little different for each kid. They're different for boys and girls are different. But around 11, 12, you see a change. Around 14, you see a change. Around 16, 17, you see another one. That's what I've been working with youth for over 2 decades. Man, that one's a big leap. They're like, whoosh. When you see them like, wow, that was amazing. Like last year, you couldn't tie your shoes still, bro. And now you're like, you just changed the transmission in your parents' car. Like, whoa, it's awesome. They just take this huge leap. But what's happening is societally, and this just breaks my heart. I get fired up about this. As a society, we've just kind of like, oh, teenagers, oh, those horrible years. Oh, I hope you survive that. Having teens is so terrible. Oh, the terrible teens. I mean, on and on and on. People's endlessly talking about how bad teens are. Like, we love it. We have 4 teens. We crazy love it. It is so fun, and they are so good and so kind, so thoughtful. They're not rebellious. They're not snarky. They're not fighting back. They're not moody. They're awesome. Yesterday, I was telling Rachel and some friends, I was like, I just had one of those days. I was kind of like walking around, like basking in the awesomeness of our teens. Like, this is so cool. It's so fun.
We work from home and we homeschool. So we're all home together all day. Now we're not always together because we go to our offices to work and do our stuff, but we come together to eat usually. And we're basically just hanging out, and
it's so fun. And they're giving up their reports of what's happening, and they're driving all over the place, going to classes and courses, and they're doing competitions and involved in this and that and the other. And we're getting feedback from them and feedback from other people about them and all this stuff. And like, this is so awesome. I love it. I've always loved working with teens. I think it's one of the most wonderful stages of life. I really do. But if you haven't done a good job, I gotta say this, that's gonna be really hard and could be outright miserable if you haven't like prepared for it, and if you don't do it well in the moment. So even if you haven't prepared for it, you can recover.
Because ultimately what we're saying from this book, Brainstorm, there's also another one called Do Hard Things. And there's others out there too, but essentially if the teen years are, there's another one called Don't Let Go of Your Kids. It's really good. If the teen years are those typical rough years, it's because it's a symptom that something has been off, particularly in your relationship with them. Because when we say, let's use my example again of my 3-year-old daughter that I'm trying to make her get dressed. If I maintained that attitude throughout her life, by the time she gets to 13, 14, 15, she's like, you know what? I'm done with you. And that's what happens. They're finally giving her this voice that they haven't felt they could do before, because you're the authority figure and you're, this in their life and you have control over them. And in the teen years, they finally start to feel that independence of like, I'm done with you. I don't have to take this crap from you anymore, right? Because I'm getting old enough. So it's a symptom essentially that something is off. And when you can prevent that through maintaining a positive, healthy relationship, and that doesn't mean you have to give up disciplining or give up, correcting or guiding or any of that. It's not like you're just their cool best friend that, lets them do whatever they want. That's not what's happening. But if you maintain that relationship, then the teen years become friendship years, really.
Awesome.
I mean, you're still there mentoring, guiding, providing feedback, sometimes saying, and we jokingly will say this, hey, remember your prefrontal cortex isn't developed till you're 25. So maybe that's not such a good idea.
That
right?
decision.
But it becomes a lot of fun. And ultimately, that I just have to emphasize this, because I think this is the most important thing to remember. It's about maintaining that relationship. If the disciplining, the teaching, the correcting, the daily interactions, okay, every single interaction you have throughout the day is taking you on one path or the other, right? That eventually will we call that the slight edge. There's a book about that, the slight edge. It seems like nothing's happening. You're going along and you're making small daily decisions in every single interaction you have with your children, each child. And one day that's going to produce an outcome that's either positive or negative, depending on what your daily interactions are like. So if you can focus on today and on making it the best it can be, making the disciplining the most positive it can be, making the small interactions, even the requests, hey, please unload the dishwasher, trying to have, I've noticed this, like if I just smile, can you unload the dishwasher, please? Right? Sometimes it's cheesy, but it really works. Like, I'm just going to put a smile at the end of that. And suddenly it's like a nice thing instead of unload the dishwasher, right? Just those little things day by day, every interaction is a chance for you to be adding deposits or making withdrawals into your relationship bank account.
And I'll say, this is a topic for a whole nother thing. You have to keep leveling up. You have to keep earning their respect and influence and persuasion with them. Otherwise, they look over at you and then they start to look down at you because you're not going anywhere. And there's this critical element of rising and earning their respect. Now, in my
Not that you're competing.
No, not yeah.
It's not a competition.
Yes, it is.
Only when you're wrestling with your voice.
No, it is in a sense that you're like,
well,
I'm still growing. I'm still progressing. I'm still learning. I'm still going somewhere. I'm still chasing goals. I'm still alive. So it's that kind of competition of like, look, I'm still living.
The woman word for that would be just, it's the example. It's the model.
So that was my
you're not competing per se, but you're modeling, because it's not like I'm trying to be as good as my daughter at piano or something. I'm just trying to be my best self at my things. Yeah. Whatever it is my thing. I want to be my best at those things.
You're still pursuing being you.
Right. Your full self.
So in my mind, I can hear some of you saying, well, yeah, you lucky Dennings lucked out and you got all good kids and you got kids without any problems. And I want to say, whoa, don't make mistakes. Stop right there. Because especially with our oldest daughter, we had some seriously rough patches starting at 11 when she hit adolescence early. She hit it at 11 hard.
She looked like she was 18 by the time she was about 13.
Yeah. So she just transformed and went through adolescence. And she was facing what we then later found out, some brain things that she inherited from her birth parents that were blockages, like she's dyslexia and other learning things. She was facing adoption. She was facing the identity crisis that all kids go through, but added to race and adoption, right? It was stacking. And then just having these psychological mental struggles. And we found out later through brain imaging, she has a super overactive basal ganglia that puts her in a survival state, fight or flight or freeze mode all the time. Like 24 hours a day, she's in this mode of fight or flight or freeze, which makes you volatile.
And she's still like this. It's gotten better because we found treatments. I would walk into her bedroom, be like, "Hey, Kai, don't scare me."
Like, what?
I'm just walking into the bedroom.
I'm not in the car. And so there was all this stuff. And so, I only share that, like, our daughter's amazing and she's learning how to manage this and she's doing phenomenal things. But like, she came born with a lot of this stuff. And then by us adopting her and being a different race and having this crazy lifestyle, she went into adolescence while we were living in Marrakesh, Morocco.
Yeah.
Like, it was crazy. And it's hard. And she didn't have any friends there because they only spoke Arabic. Like, so what I'm only telling you all this because we've experienced some tough stuff, people. And there was a lot in those years that was extremely challenging because of those specific things that in a lot of ways were out of our control, both for her and for us. And then she went through some terrible trauma. She ended up experiencing some really, really bad things. really bad things that no parent would wish on anyone. And we had to work through that. So please don't think that it's just been this easy breeze and we're like, everything is awesome. But we're grateful for the challenges because we learned how to address them and how to help. And now we can help others who are facing a challenge. So I know you may have some challenged kids, but this stuff matters all the more. And you've got to be aware of how it's affecting all this, even to things like how food is affecting your kids' brains. Some of your kids might be reacting to some of the food you're having, and that's causing the behavior problem. I've seen that so many times.
Yeah.
You remove this and all of a sudden the behavior changes.
It might not be ADD. Maybe they just shouldn't be eating sugar or something other random.
Or
number 4.
Violent or emotional or depressed or discouraged. Like
because of food. A
lot of kids are getting depressed because they have a low fat diet. The brain is fat and it needs healthy fats. You know, and you're like, give them some fat. And they're like, man, I feel great. Or they're consuming an unending stream of visual trash. And they're like, why do my kids feel like this? Why do they behave like that? And we're like, well, look at the input. Input determines output, right? It's all of this stuff. But specifically with adolescents, what's happening is this storm. And their brains are going through this massive transformation. And people are prone to say, oh, all those hormones, teenagers are so hormones, just raging on hormones. It's actually not hormones. Like there's very little hormonal changes. This Dr. Siegel, he's like, it's the brain. It's literally changing. So this is what they were as a kid. And now it's going, we got to create this and make these connections. And so kids become very independent. They start to resist you simply because you're the parent. It's not personal. That's what I love to tell people, parents. It's not personal. It's biological. Like it's not you. It's you as a parent because they want independent. And you're like, yeah, you want your kids to become independent or they're going to be living in your basement when they're 30. Like you want that. But learn how to work with it. Don't take it personal. Don't fight back. Don't grab the collar, so to speak. And like, I'm gonna pull you back in, kid. Like, okay, cool. You want some independence? Let's do this. Great. Let's do that. Let's have some responsibility. Let's earn those freedoms and privileges. Like, so you learn to work with it. And they're like, oh, this feels great. And you teach them how to earn trust so they can make those decisions. And when they make mistakes, you help them earn back the trust. But you have to know what's happening in their heads. And because they're making all these changes, they often can't think clearly. We go to our teens and we're like, what were you thinking? They weren't. And why would you do something so risky and so stupid? Well, because as their brain changes, they often can't think through next level thinking and consequences. One of the examples he used in an interview I heard, the Dr. Siegel, he's like, teenagers, they get a driver's license. You got a couple of teenage boys and they're like, dude, let's race our cars through this neighborhood. That would be awesome. And so they don't think through like, what's the risk of me doing 90 through this neighborhood? Right? Because their brains aren't like, they're not all wired to be like, let's think through what all the possibilities and what could happen and why this could be dangerous and why I probably shouldn't do that. And so he gives you tools and strategies. He talked about the moral compass. He says, make sure your kids develop a moral compass so that whatever gets thrown at them from their kids or neighbors or some random thought, they're like, wait a minute, does this fit here with the moral compass? And if I'm always striving to do the right thing, I'm going to pause and be like, it sounds cool, but does that feel right? Who might not like that? Ah, yeah. And they make better decisions, right? So there's all kinds of tools and strategies. I think let's stop there. Like that's a lot to take in. We've been at you with the fire hose here.
Like
but
usual. This
stuff is so important and so transformative in parenting and how you approach your kids and raise your kids. And I hope I didn't make anybody feel bad or guilty. Like we're not travel agents here. We're not sending you guys on guilt trips. But I don't know that we can emphasize enough adequately how important this is that we approach parenting from a brain development, brain condition approach. Like, and where are your kids?
Relationship based.
Yeah, has to. So whatever's going on with the kid, like you have a great relationship, you're close, you're working through this, and wherever they're at in any of their cognitive development, brain development, the relationship's always awesome. So you can work through all the stages and changes. And that's kind of the anchor. That's what holds everything together. Whatever they're going through, the ups and downs, the crises, the mistakes, the failures, the craziness, the awesomeness, always held together by the relationship. I love this stuff. Okay, I think we probably gave you like 8 book recommendations today. So get out of the reading. If you have questions, put them in the video. The video has a comment section here. Ask questions, comment examples of this. Again, we all share together, but let's lean in and maybe set reminders, you guys, put on your calendars, just somehow remember this. So we check in with ourselves to always remember, okay, where's this child at? And how should I engage? And that'll change everything in our parenting. So love you guys. Thanks for being here. Thanks for watching us. Thanks for being awesome parents. Let's go out and raise amazing kids that become amazing adults. Reach upward.